Hi, thank you for joining us tonight for this wonderful presentation and honoring Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I'm going to introduce to you Daniela Gioseffi, and she's going to go ahead and take over introducing each and every participant. And then toward the end, if you have questions, you can go ahead and type them into the chat or into the Q&A, and we'll take those. This is being recorded, and so it'll be available for you if you would like to see that. And at the end, I can give you an update on future presentations, future webinars, if you're interested in that. Let's just dive right in. Daniela Gioseffi is the winner of the John Tiare Award for Lifetime Achievement in Poetry and an American Book Award. Her 18 books of poetry and prose include 6 of poetry from Eggs and the Lake to Wagging Beauty and anthologies from major presses. Women on War, International Writings, A Women's Studies Classic, Imprint 30 Years, and On Prejudice, A Global Perspective. Her latest, #MeToo, Antioe, was recently featured as a YASA webinar. Daniela will read Ferlinghetti poetry and present and introduce readers. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. And I didn't wag beauty, I waged beauty, but that's okay. Thank you so much, Courtney. We couldn't do this without your help. You're wonderful. I do want to introduce Lawrence Ferlinghetti a little bit. I'm sure most of you know who he is out there, but I do want to say that he passed from his earthly being on February 22nd, though his poetry is much alive with us. He was at the age of nearly 101 because he was never a big druggie and he was a very stable kind of man. Actually, he ran a submarine chaser in the Navy during the war, World War II. So he was a very level-headed guy, spoke many languages. And he was the co-founder of City Lights Booksellers or Bookstore, the most widely known literary bookstore in the world, really. Famously, he published the Beats, but he did not consider himself a beat poet. So please don't call him that. He didn't want to be called a beat. He had much more classical references. He was far more widely learned than most of the Beats. He was the author of poetry, translations, fiction, theater, art criticism, and film narration. And he was also a painter. Ferlinghetti was best known for his first collection of poems, A Coney Island of the Mind, 1958, which has been translated into 9 languages. And it was the best-selling American poetry book of the second half of the 20th century. It sold more than any other volume of poetry, and it's still selling today. Over 1 million copies. When Ferlinghetti became 100 years of age in 2019, the city of San Francisco proclaimed his birthday, Lawrence Ferlinghetti Day. Ferlinghetti was named San Francisco's Poet Laureate in 1998, and in 2003, he was awarded the Poetry Society of America's Frost Medal, the Authors Guild Lifetime Achievement Award, and he was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters. The National Book Foundation honored him with the inaugural Literarian Award in 2005, given for outstanding service to the American literary community. And I want to mention that because he won the trial for Howl, which was put on trial as a book of obscenity, he won that all by himself. Ginsburg never even attended the trial. Ferlinghetti won it by himself, and it changed American poetry and literature for all of us. Because of that trial that Ferlinghetti won, we can all say what we please in our poetry, and we are not censored as we might have been if he had lost that trial, which he won by himself with the help of the Lawyers Guild. In 2007, he was named commander of the French Order of Arts and Letters because he attended the Sorbonne and was fluent in French. So he was greatly honored by the French, by the Italians, all over the world. In 2008, he was awarded the John Ciardi Award for Lifetime Achievement in Poetry. And that was the year after I won it. So I wrote to Michael Palma and I said, I can't win this before Ferlinghetti. And Michael quickly corrected that and quickly and awarded the award, the John Ciardi Award for Lifetime Achievement to Ferlinghetti. So I'm very happy to host this. I've had some correspondence with him. He sent me some paintings, and I'm thrilled to read from Wild Dream of a New Beginning, which is a 1974 book originally. And the amazing thing was what a visionary he was. He saw climate catastrophe coming way before others. And he wrote Rough Song of Animals Dying. In a dream within a dream, I dreamt a dream of the reality of existence inside the ultimate computer, which is the universe in which the arrow of time flies both ways through bent space. In a dream within a dream, I dreamt a dream of all the animals dying, all animals everywhere dying and dying, the wild animals, the long-haired animals, winged animals, feathered animals, clawed and scaled and furry animals, rutting and dying and dying. In a dream within a dream, I dreamt a dream of creatures everywhere dying out in shrinking rainforests, in piney woods and high sierras, on shrinking prairies and tumbleweed mesas, captured, beaten, strapped, starved and stunned, cornered and traded, species not meant to be nomadic, wandering, rootless as man. In a dream within a dream, I dreamt a dream of all the animals crying out in their hidden places, in the still silent places left to them, slinking away and crawling about through the last wild places, through the dense underbrush, the last great thickets, beyond the mountains, crisscrossed with switchbacks, beyond the marshes, beyond the plains and fences, the West one with barbed wire machines, in the high country, in the low country, crisscrossed with highways. In a dream within a dream, I dream of how they feed and rut and run and hide. In a dream within a dream, I saw how the seals are beaten on the ice fields, the soft white furry seals with eggshell skulls, the great green turtles beaten and eaten, exotic birds netted and caged and tethered, rare wild beasts and strange reptiles and weird woo-zoos hunted down for zoos by bearded marketeers who afterwards ride around Singapore in German limousines. In a dream within a dream, I dreamt a dream of the earth heating up and drying out in the famous greenhouse effect under its canopy of carbon dioxide, breathed out by a billion infernal combustion engines, mixed with the sweet smell of burning flesh. In a dream within a dream of animals calling to each other in codes we never understood. The seal and steer cry out in the same voice as they are clubbed in Chicago stockyards and Newfoundland snowfields. In the same cry, the wounds never heal. In the commonweal of animals, we steal their lives to feed our own, and with their lives, our dreams are sown. In a dream within a dream, I dreamt a dream of the daily scrimmage for existence in the wind-up model of the universe, the spinning meat wheel world in which I was a fish who eats his tail, in which I was a claw upon a beach, in which I was a snake upon a tree in which I was a serpent's egg, a yin yang yoke of good and evil about to consume itself. That is a visionary poem. And he said on the back of the book, A Wild Dream of a New Beginning, poetry, the common carrier for the transportation of the public to higher places than other wheels can carry them. He did believe in poetry that would be understandable by the common man, would be a soul of humanity, teaching it a better way of life. So bless him, rest in peace, Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And now I'm going to be introducing our other speakers in alphabetical order. And Amore is an artist and a writer who has spent her life between Italy and America. She's a founder of the Carving Studio and Sculpture Center. Awards include Fulbright and Mellon Fellowships, public art commissions in the US and Japan, the Lifeline exhibit at Ellis Island, and several published books. Please welcome Amore. And this is how we applaud on Zoom. B. Please unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. There you
Hello,
are.
everybody. Thank you very much, Daniela. That was a pretty forceful poem. Very, very forceful. But I lived in San Francisco, right around the corner from City Lights in the 60s. And it was my favorite haunt on Sunday afternoons. I was a young mother working part-time and had practically no time for creativity in those days. I'd written a poem, long sort of prose poem to Ferlinghetti, and I'm just going to read the last couple of lines, and then I'll read a poem of Ferlinghetti's himself. I would often go, this is myself talking, I would often go to a very small cafe on Telegraph Hill that was very out of the way, not public like the Cafe Pompeii or any of the North Beach, the lower North Beach haunts. And I would often see this gentleman, Ferlinghetti, a quintessential gentleman in jacket and pressed shirt, always sat alone toward the right center of the small cafe. Light from the window that faced the bay glinted off his silvery hair and closely trimmed beard. We never spoke. In fact, at the beginning, I asked myself if he really was the famous poet, co-owner of City Lights. I never saw him at the bookstore, only in this quiet cafe. His presence was a light to me, proof that another world of writing and thought existed, giving me hope for a more distant day when there might be more time for my own creative expression. As I walked down the steep hill to Washington Square Park, pushing my stroller, I would muse on the image of the poet as an ordinary man, sipping espresso, oblivious to the young mother breathing in his aura of words and light, taking inspiration from his presence and his poems, still seeking the courage to believe in her own voice. So I think the ripples that one boulder like Ferlinghetti is in the world really travels and keeps resounding, because each of us influenced by him keep the ripples going. So Daniela had asked me to read a poem that had to do with Ferlinghetti's art, because I'm an artist as well as a writer. So I chose The Painter's Dream, which is in These Are My Rivers, a wonderful collection of Ferlinghetti's poems. And I chose it in particular, there are several poems that he wrote about painting, because it really shows a lot of his influences and the people that he loved. So here we go. I'm with Picasso and Fernand in a dark mantilla, looking tragic with turpentine like rain running down her shoulder. I'm in Pontoise with Pissarro and with Gauguin in the Vanilla Grove, and in the mountains of Saint Remy with Van Gogh, and at the bend in the road through the forest with Cézanne, and with Vuillard in the Place Ventimiglia, and with Picasso and El Loco and his blue acrobats, and with Picasso shaking his fist at the sky in Guernica, and I'm Dura's steeplejack seen by Marianne Moore. And those harpies, the Demoiselles d'Avignon, are glaring at me personally. And Degas' ballet dancers are dancing for Matisse and Monet and Renoir. And all the Sunday painters of Paris and John Sloan and all, the Sunday painters of America, and most of the painters of the Hudson River School floating along so calm and holding hands with most of the West Coast figurative painters and their Have a Nice Day cohorts. But I'm also with Malevich in his red square in the beautiful corner, and with Delacroix Liberty leading the muses, and with Goya's groaning masses in the disasters of war. And I'm rocking across the Atlantic with Whistler's mother. And I'm crossing the Delaware with Washington standing in the boat against Navy regulations. And I'm with Bierstadt crossing the Rockies on a mule. And with Motherwell and de Kooning and Klein and Pollock and Larry Rivers in the broken light, in the shaken light of the late 20th century. And then I'm walking through a huge exhibition in the Whole World Museum of Art, containing all the greatest paintings of the entire fine arts tradition of all the centuries of Western civilization. When suddenly a wild-haired band bursts into the museum and starts spraying paint solvent onto all the paintings, and all the paint in all the paintings starts to run down onto the floors of all the galleries, forming fantastic new and exciting images of the end of our own little universe. And elite curators in Gucci shoes rush in and cut up the painted floors and hang them on the walls, while picturesque bohemian painters in berets stagger through the halls, weeping. Anyway, great poet and great artist. Thank you. Mille grazie, Ferlinghetti.
Thank you, B. And now we will be hearing from, that's so interesting because he was a very interesting painter. He had many gallery shows in San Francisco, where he was better known on the West Coast than the East Coast. So I hope we're helping more people understand how great he was. And now we're going to hear from Dennis Barrone in the, and he is the editor of New Hungers for Old, 100 years of Italian-American poetry. He's the author of Beyond Memory, Italian Protestants in Italy and America, as well as Sound Hammer and more than 20 other works. He retired from the University of St. Joseph's in 2020. So please welcome Dennis Barrone.
Hi, thanks Daniela for putting this together. In spring, Lawrence Ferlinghetti wrote in his recent and late work, Little Boy, in spring the earth sings, as if it knew love songs by heart, while a sense of loss still pervades poetry, past and present. Oh, what is it in us that prefers singing of loss instead of present ecstasies? This poem that I'm going to read by Lawrence Ferlinghetti is a poem that looks back. Plan du centre de Paris à vol d'assaut. Bird's eye view of Paris in English. Flying away to Milan, I look down and back at Paris, as in that famous map seen by a bird in flight, and think of Alan yesterday, saying it was all solidified nostalgia, houses, monuments, and streets, bare trees and parks down there, fixed in time, and time is forever. Exactly where we left them years ago, our bodies pass through them as through a transparent scrim, early version of ourselves, transmuted now 2 decades later. And was that myself standing on that far corner, Place Saint-Sulpice, first arrived in Paris, sea bag slung, fancying myself some sea-born Conrad carrying Coleridge's albatross? Or was that myself walking through the Tuileries in early snow? And here Danton met Robespierre, both later to descend into earth through that metro entrance. And here Sartre lived with Beauvoir above the Café Bonaparte before death shook them apart. The myth goes on. And here in Luxembourg, I sat by a balustrade in a rented iron chair reading Proust and Apollinaire, while the day turned to dust and a nightwood sprang up around me. Solidified nostalgia indeed. The smell of Gouas still hangs in the air, and the cemetery of Père Lachaise, the great stone tomb still yawn with the solidified ennui of eternity. And yes, here I knew such aloneness at the corner of another street. The dawn yawned in some trauma I was living in back then. Paris itself a floating dream, a great stone ship adrift, made of dusk and dawn and darkness. Dumb trauma of youth, such waste of love, such wordless hungers, mute neuroses, yearnings and gropings, fantasies and flameouts, such endless walking through the bent streets, such fumbling art, models drawn with blindfolds, such highs and sweet inebriations. I salute you now, dumb inchoate youth, callow stripling, and offer you my left hand with a slight derisive laugh.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis.
One more word. During my first year in college, I wrote a long poem with long lines in Ginsberg, Corso, Kerouac, Ferlinghetti style, attacking the college I attended. Despondent over the injustices of which I wrote, I hitchhiked to another college where I heard Ferlinghetti read in the chapel. Dumb trauma of youth, such waste of love, such wordless hungers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce Fred Gardaphe. He's a distinguished professor of English and Italian American Studies at Queens College of the City University of New York and the John D. Calandra Italian American Institute. His books include Italian Signs, American Streets, The Evolution of Italian American Narrative, Leaving Little Italy, and From Wise Guys to Wise Men, Masculinities and the Italian American Gangster. So please welcome Fred Gardaphe, who has done so much for the Italian American community of authors. We're all indebted to Fred.
And I am indebted to Mr. Ferlinghetti. I'm going to have a brief story because the poem works into the story. I had read Coney Island of the Mind back when I was writing poems that rhymed. I stopped writing poems that rhymed. I was 20 years old. I hitchhiked to California, the sole purpose of which was to see Lawrence Ferlinghetti. So Dennis, we both have that in common. We hitchhiked to go see him. My hitchhiking ended up being a 3-month stint, but I got to City Lights Books and I went up to the counter and I said, "Is Mr. Ferlinghetti?" And he says, "He's in his office. He's downstairs." So I went downstairs and his door was cracked and he was leaning back when his feet were up on the table and his head was down like this. And all I could do was stand there and look at him. I didn't have the guts to knock on the door. But just seeing him was enough. And so I left. That was 1971. No, I'm sorry, 1973, because I just turned 21. I was just about to turn 21. Forward to 1990, a friend of mine in Chicago, Barry Selesky, writes a biography of Ferlinghetti, and Ferlinghetti comes in on a press junket And I told Barry, that about my story. He says, "Oh, you got to meet him." So he set me up to do an interview, which I did for the Franoi back then. And I got to meet him, and he turned the whole interview to interviewing me. And so I told him this story. He says, "You're such a fool. Why didn't you start?" He said, "I was probably just falling asleep doing nothing." And we had a great conversation. And it was at that point in 1990 that he said, "I have a poem for you." Yeah, there's the book. He says, "I have a poem for you. And it's called The Old Italian's Dying." And so I asked him if we could put that in From the Margin, which is what I'm going to read today in the most recent edition of From the Margin. And he went on and published it. And eventually he would come to an Italian American Studies Association conference, did an address, and so on and so forth. He's been very, very friendly over the years. And I have correspondence with him. I mean, who knows how many other thousands of people he must have done this to, but he certainly made me move. When writing moves me, I move myself. And that's what he did. And so this is The Old Italian's Dying, a poem that I have been teaching for a good 25, 30 years. And I love reading it. And it was a poem that Nat Scamacca asked me if I would translate it for, because he wanted to publish it in the Trapani Nuova in Sicily, as part of his publication for the Antigruppo group that he had put together. So this is The Old Italian's Dying. For years, the old Italians have been dying all over America. For years, the old Italians in faded felt hats have been sunning themselves and dying. You have seen them on the benches in the park in Washington Square. The old Italians in their black high button shoes, the old men in their old felt fedoras with stained hatbands have been dying and dying day by day. You have seen them every day in Washington Square, San Francisco. The slow bell tolls in the morning in the church of Peter and Paul, in the Marzipan church on the plaza. Toward 10 in the morning, the slow bell tolls in the tower of Peter and Paul, and the old men who are still alive sit sunning themselves in a row on the wood benches in the park and watch the processions in and out, funerals in the morning, weddings in the afternoon, slow bell in the morning, fast bell at noon, in one door, out the other. The old men sit there in their hats and watch the coming and going. You have seen them, the ones who feed the pigeons, cutting the stale bread with their thumbs and penknives. The ones with old pocket watches, the old ones with gnarled hands and wild eyebrows, the ones with the baggy pants with both belt and suspenders. The grappa drinkers with teeth like corn, the Piemontese, the Genovese, the Siciliani, smelling of garlic and pepperonis, the ones who love Mussolini, the old fascists, the ones who love Garibaldi, the old anarchists reading L'Umanità Nova, the ones who love Secco and Vanzetti. They are almost all gone now. They are sitting and waiting their turn and sunning themselves in front of the church, over the doors of which is inscribed a phrase which would seem to be unfinished from Dante's Paradiso about the glory of the one who moves everything. The old men are waiting for it to be finished, for their glorious sentence on earth to be finished. The slow bell tolls and tolls. The pigeons strut about, not even thinking of flying, the air too heavy with tolling. The black hired hearses draw up, the black limousines with black window shades shielding the widows with the long black veils who will outlive them all. You have seen them, madre di terra, madre di mare. The widows climb out of the limousines. The family mourners step out in stiff suits. The widows walk so slowly up the steps of the cathedral fishnet veils drawn down, leaning hard on dark cloth arms. Their faces do not fall apart. They are merely drawn apart. They are still the matriarchs, outliving everyone. The old Dagos dying out in little Italies all over America. The old dead Dagos hauled out in the morning sun that does not mourn for anyone. One by one, year by year, they are carried out. The bell never stops tolling. The old Italians with lap-straight faces are hauled out of the hearses by the paid pallbearers in mafioso morning coats and dark glasses. The old dead men are hauled out in their black coffins like small skiffs. They enter the true church for the first time in many years in these carved black boats ready to be ferried over. The priests scurry about as if to cast off the lines. The other old men still alive on the benches watch it all with their hats on. You have seen them sitting there, waiting for the bocce ball to stop rolling, waiting for the bell to stop tolling and tolling, for the slow bell to be finished tolling, telling the unfinished Paradiso story, as seen in an unfinished phrase on the face of a church, as seen in a fisherman's face, in a black boat without sails, making his final haul. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Fred Gardaphe.
Arrivederci, Lorenzo.
Yes. And I move along quickly because of time. It was so good to hear that poem, Fred. Maria Lisella will be our next reader, and she's the 6th Poet Laureate of Queens, New York, and was awarded a fellowship from the Academy of American Poets. She co-curates the Italian American Writers Association. Her collections include Amore on Hope Street and Two Naked Feet. She is New York culture editor for the Jerusalem Post. Please welcome Maria Lisella.
Thank you. Please don't forget Thieves in the Family, because that's my very Italian one from New York Quarterly. So I'm gonna, thanks to my husband, Gil Fagiani, who was an inordinate book collector. Whenever we went to Italy, he would find bilingual books by American authors. He would pick them up. So I'm gonna read the first section of Un Luna Parche del Cuore. Tutto cambia e niente cambia. Finiscono secoli e tutto continua come nulla finisse. Come le nubi ancora s'arrestano e mezzo volo, come dirigibili presi tra venti contrari. E la febbre dell'efferata vita di città ancora strozza le strade, ma ancora io sento cantare, ancora le voci dei poeti, mischiati agli schiamazzi delle troie, nell'antica Manhattan o nella Parigi o di Baudelaire, echeggiare richiami di uccelli lungo i vicoli della storia, ora coi nomi cambiati. E ora siamo nel Novecento e la borsa è di nuovo crollata. E mio padre vagabondo qui vicino con il fedora in testa, occhi sul marciapiedi, un'unica lira italiana, un centesimo che raffigura la testa di un indiano in tasca. Trafficanti di liquori e carri funebri passano al rallentatore. Risuona la campagna di ferro di una chiesa framista agli allarmi delle macchine nell'anno 2000. Mentre abiti nuovi corrono al lavoro in grattacieli oscillanti, mentre le striglione ancora strillano, annunciando l'ultima follia, e risate s'alzano sul mare lontano. So I'm going to read it in English now. Everything changes and nothing changes. Centuries end and all goes on as if nothing ever ends. As clouds still stop in mid-flight like dirigibles caught in cross winds. And the fever of savage city life still grips the streets. But I still hear singing, still the voices of poets, mixed with the cry of prostitutes in old Manhattan or Baudelaire's Paris, bird calls echoing down the alleys of history now renamed. And now it's the 1900s, and the market has crashed again. And my father drifts by in his fedora, his eyes on the sidewalk, a single lira, and an Indian head penny in his pocket. Bootleggers and hearses pass in slow motion. A church tolls its iron bell, mixed with the sounds of car alarms in the year 2000. As new suits hurry to work in swaying skyscrapers, as newsboys still cry out, announcing the latest lunacy, and laughter arises on the distant sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Lisella. Thank you. And next we will be hearing from Michael Palma. Michael Palma's books include the poetry collections of Fortune in Gold and Begin in Gladness and Faithful in My Fashion, essays on the translation of poetry. His 20 volumes of translations from Italian poets include a fully rhymed version of Dante's Inferno for W.W. Norton. Thank you so much for being here, Michael Palma.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for organizing this event and for including me in it. I never met Ferlinghetti personally, face to face, unlike some of the people on the panel, though I did have two interactions of a sort with him. In 2001, when my Dante translation was about to be published, and the publisher asked me for a list of prominent literary people who might provide blurbs. On that list, on a whim, I put Ferlinghetti's name down. Now, he was not a strictly formalist poet. He had his own experiences in translation were rather limited. The little volumes of Jacques Prévert and later of Pasolini. He had no reason, as far as I could tell, to be aware that he shared the planet with me. And I was quite surprised then and immensely touched and grateful when he provided a very generous blurb for the book. Later on, my friend Martin Mitchell, the late editor of Pivot, whom many of my New York friends in the poetry world will fondly remember, said to me that this was probably the only book in the history of the world that had blurbs from both Richard Wilbur and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And then a few years later, when Italian Americana was about to give to give Ferlinghetti the John Ciardi Award for Lifetime Achievement, an award which, as Daniela mentioned, was originated at her suggestion, again, for which I'm quite grateful. I wrote to Ferlinghetti to be certain that he would accept the award, and then later I sent him successive drafts of the citation that was going to be printed for the award. Now, here was a man with an international reputation as a poet, who had sold more volumes of poetry than any other living poet, who had won any number of international awards, and had no reason to feel especially thrilled that a little journal of very limited circulation was about to bestow yet another honor upon him. And yet he wrote to say that he was greatly honored by the award. He was, I thought, stunningly modest about himself and his achievements throughout. And my experience of Ferlinghetti as a reader, of course, goes back much further than that. When I was in high school at the very beginning of the 1960s, the first book of poetry that I ever bought by a poet born in the 20th century, by a poet who was not already a part of the established literary canon, was Ferlinghetti's Coney Island of the Mind. And it meant a great deal to me at the age of 15 or 16. It blew open my horizons, my awareness of what could be said in poetry and how it could be said. It went a long way toward shaping my understanding of modern poetry and its possibilities at a very crucial point in my own development. And the poem that I've chosen to read appeared both in that volume and in its predecessor, Ferlinghetti's first book, Pictures of the Gone World. And it's a poem that very well fits the title of Pictures of the Gone World, since, as so often is the case with Ferlinghetti, it provides a description of the surface of things, and of things, many of them that can no longer be seen, unfortunately. And it's a poem also that reminds us that, as I said in the citation, for all his popularity, Ferlinghetti has never courted wide readership, and his poetry is as culturally elusive as that of T.S. Eliot. It's a poem partly, in fact, it's a poem in which reading and reality intersect very nicely, and a useful reminder to those critics and others who often draw a distinction between literature and the real world, that reading a poem is just as much a real act as any other. It's a poem that Ferlinghetti usually reprinted in various selected and collected editions. Reading Yeats, I do not think of Ireland, but of midsummer New York, and of myself back then, reading that copy I found on the 3rd Avenue L. The L with its fly-hung fans and its signs reading "Spitting is forbidden." The L, careening through its 3rd-story world with its 3rd-story people in their 3rd-story doors, looking as if they'd never heard of the ground. An old dame watering her plants, or a joker in a straw putting a stick pin in his peppermint tie, and looking just like he had nowhere to go but Coney Island. Or an undershirted guy rocking in his rocker, watching the L pass by, as if he expected it to be different each time. Reading Yeats, I do not think of Arcady and of its woods which Yeats thought dead. I think instead of all the gone faces getting off at midtown places, with their hats and their jobs, and of that lost book I had with its blue cover and its white inside, where a penciled hand had written, "Horsemen pass by." Oh, again, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Lawrence Ferlinghetti.
You're muted, Daniela.
You're muted. You're muted.
Yes,
Oh, there you are.
I'm sorry. I just want to cough in the middle of Michael's poem. Thank you so much, Michael, and for that quote from Yeats at the end, "That horseman passed by," is so profound in that poem. Thank you so much. And next we will be hearing from Nina Kari Tassi, Nina Kari Tassi. She's a New York poet. She's published 4 poetry books, The Jeremiah Tree, Antarctic Vision, Spirit Ascending, and Light and Glory. She's won a 2020 nominee for the Pushcart Prize and a semifinalist in the 2020 River Styx International Poetry Contest. Her upcoming work is Love's Universal. Please welcome Nina Tassi.
Thank you, Daniela. I must say this has been a beautiful, beautiful reading so far, and I found myself wishing that Ferlinghetti could be here listening to us. And then I thought, well, gee, he was Italian and probably nominally Catholic. Maybe he can hear us. At any rate, it's just given me new appreciation for him. I have two short poems of Ferlinghetti's to read. The first one is very lyrical and it describes what a poet does. Constantly risking absurdity. Constantly risking absurdity and death whenever he performs above the heads of his audience. The poet, like an acrobat, climbs on rhyme to a high wire of his own making, and balancing on I-beams above a sea of faces, paces his way to the other side of the day, performing entracciata and sleight of foot tricks and other high theatrics, and all without mistaking anything for what it may not be, for he's the super realist who must perforce perceive taught truth before the taking of each stance or step in his supposed advance toward that still higher perch where beauty stands and waits with gravity to start her death-defying leap. And he, a little Charlie Chaplin man, who may or may not catch her fair eternal form spread eagled in the empty air of existence. The second one, I'm not sure when it was written, but it could have been written today, and you'll see why when you hear it. It's called Pity the Nation. Pity the nation whose people are sheep and whose shepherds mislead them. Pity the nation whose leaders are liars, whose sages are silenced, and whose bigots haunt the airwaves. Pity the nation that raises not its voice except to praise conquerors and acclaim the bully as hero, and aims to rule the world by force and by torture. Pity the nation that knows no other language but its own and no other culture but its own. Pity the nation whose breath is money and sleeps the sleep of the too well-fed. Pity the nation, oh, pity the people who allow their rights to erode and their freedoms to be washed away. My country, tears of thee, sweet land of liberty.
Yes, indeed, it could have been written today. And I think it's why Ferlinghetti, for all his genius and all his output, never won a Pulitzer or a National Book Award, as no Italian-American poet ever has. I think because he was so progressive politically, that may have had something to do with it, because he won prizes from all over the world, and he certainly deserved a Pulitzer or a National Book Award, but he won many other prizes. And now I want to introduce Lawrence Ferlinghetti's friend, who spent the last years of his life as his assistant, Mauro Aprile Zanetti. And I'm going to ask Mauro to please introduce himself and tell some of what he knew of Ferlinghetti and the things that he did to celebrate him. If he would please not be shy and tell us about his work celebrating Lawrence Ferlinghetti and helping him and telling us about his last days. Please, Mauro. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much.
Who is a poet himself and bilingual.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing today. And I don't know actually what's happening to me, but today I'm feeling kind of, I don't know, it's happening, you know. I can all still believe that guy is no more at 250 Francisco Street, where I spent so much time in my last 8 years. And I don't know, maybe it's something today, but while I was listening to each one of you, I'm realizing better now. I've been kind of in a, I don't know, um, no time thing. Like I'm always thinking he just departed, but of course, you know, the Trinity you are talking today, let's call it like this: life, poetry, and legacy. I met this Trinity 8 years ago, and I was not a fan of Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I didn't know actually almost anything about Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I come from a different kind of culture, Italian, born and raised in Sicily, multilingual since I was a kid, being Sicilian speaker. And I thank my parents for that, because later I realized that my dialect um, was the concentration of 10 languages. And I was always in O's and O's in discovering the origins, the roots of words. My background is French, so no one is perfect. I come from that kind of studies and poetry and philosophy mainly. My master was Gilles Deleuze, and the only guy who mentioned Lawrence Ferlinghetti to me in one of his books was Gilles Deleuze. Deleuze wrote a lot about what he called the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon literature. And when he wrote that essay, he was, of course, hated in France for writing and saying things like that. But there were many reasons why. And amongst the list of poets and writers that Gilles Deleuze listed, there was also Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I was in love totally with William Burroughs. That was my kind of guy and writer, also because my background was more in filmmaking, and that got the kind of creativity and fold up and cut ups and all the creative things that Burroughs put together were so inspiring for me. But I knew about Lawrence, about this invention of the fourth person of the singular, and I was always like, what is it? This poet created the fourth singular person. So not just three persons in the singular, I, you, she, it, he, but a fourth. Anyway, one day, very quickly, of course, it's a long story, mine. One day I met by pure chance. I was not looking for Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And I was told by people in San Francisco, where I moved in 2013, January, from New York City, after like a decade spent in New York, back and forth with Europe. I was told Lawrence Ferlinghetti was kind of dying. He was no more out. He was not doing anything. So it was like impossible. But one day he came into a very old Bettola trattoria in North Beach called the US Original, which does not stand for United States, stands for Unione Sportiva Original, and dubbed to be the oldest restaurant in the West Coast, fighting with other fellows. Anyway, Lawrence came in, and I still remember he was tall, still, even if, older and a little bit shorter, but he was a tall man, and he was a pure shadow, to put it in Michael Palma's world, which is Dante. He looked like a big shadow coming in the dark from the outside, and he was accompanied by his Italian biographer, Giada Diano, who also had a PhD, expert in Lawrence Ferlinghetti literature. And I stood up because people were saying the old Italians running that place saying, oh, Lawrence Ferlinghetti è qua, etc. They were talking. And I said, oh, he's still here? So like, it's true, he's there. And I stood up just to say hi. I didn't want to disturb. But it happened that quickly you wanted to know if I, was Italian. And when I said my name, Mauro, Aprile, Zanetti, he was like kind of remembering something. And I felt like, oh my God, how can he remember what about me? I'm nobody. And he said, well, I'm not sure, but maybe a book. And here's the bookseller. He remembered something. And actually, he had a copy of a book that I had published years ago in New York City on the occasion of the largest exhibition at the Metropolitan, at the Italian Institute and Casa Zerilli Marimo on Giorgio Morandi, because I wrote this book on La Dolce Vita by Fellini, and the title was La Natura Morta della Dolce Vita, a mysterious Morandi in the metrics of Fellini's vision. And it's a big catalog, all painted, illustrated, and a few pages. It's a small book, but large catalog. And he remembered that kind of thing. Why? Because he was attending the Italian Institute in San Francisco, where there was the Italian school, to learn his Italian more and more, better and better. And the director of the Instituto gave him a copy of the book that I had introduced and presented after New York in San Francisco in 2009. Anyway, that was the kind of click. And he opened his house to me for a coffee. Long story short, after 2 years seeing each other from time to time, he asked me to become his assistant because he needed help for French translation, also for Italian, but also creating exhibitions. And in fact, I opened the grand reopening of the Italian Institute in San Francisco was made with a big exhibition by Lawrence Ferlinghetti titled Fluxare, European Connection. And he was obsessed with this verb that he made it up, fluxare, and he was always conjugating it. Io fluxo, tu fluxi, lui esso fluxa. And he said, this is the verb that I really would like to be in dictionaries. So here I am to talk about legacy. The greatest legacy would be to see the verb, which stands for fulfill your own dreams.
Uh-huh.
Or, there are also synonyms. You can mean also making love without sex. This was by Lawrence, Anyway, so we started collaborating, and the last year was fully dedicated to Little Boy, where I was totally part of. That's why I'm part of the last page in the acknowledgement with another young fellow like Sterling Lord. Sterling Lord is almost 100 years old, and he's the literary agent who discovered Jack Kerouac on the road, and he was always about Lawrence, and he was the only one able to sell that book because Little Boy definitely wasn't a typical book by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Having worked on that book for more than 1 year until the last final edition, collaborating with Doubleday Penguin Group, I would say that is part of what experts call eugeria from the Greek, which was used for Michelangelo. Michelangelo did a Pietà when he was a very young kid that everybody knows. It's in the Vatican, a young pyramidic, Pietà. And when he was about to die, almost 90 years old, he finally sculpted the Pietà as he wanted to do it, which is totally different. And he looks like he was a Henry Moore in 1900 to sculpt that Pietà and not an artist as Michelangelo. So I helped Lawrence with all his work in the last 6 years, which was not really a little thing, actually. He produced more than ever. So I feel so happy and proud of being part of keeping the poet alive, painting horizon for a young fellow who was 94 when we met, and he actually lived shy to his 102, almost starting his 103rd lap around the sun on this very planet called Earth. So also a small, very small poem that I would like to share with you is titled Trump's Trojan Horse. This is the last poem that Lawrence wrote in July 2017. I was part of this writing, also to work on just exchanging one or two words, like all the craftsmanship back in Renaissance, changing just one word. And the poem reads like this. Homer didn't live long enough to tell of Trump's White House, which is his Trojan horse, from which all the president's men burst out to destroy democracy and install a predatory capitalism as absolute ruler of the world, ever more powerful than nations. And it's happening as we sleep. Bow down, common man, bow down. This poem was translated in this little book created by David Giannoni, who is a little boy's publisher for French. The book is coming very soon. It was translated in almost 20 languages. We have Arabic, Hebrew, any kind of language in this small book that we created in 2019 on the occasion of Lawrence's 100th birthday. On that very occasion, to close my thing today, actually, I had been working from 2018 with the city of San Francisco, petitioning as first person to ask two things: to give Lawrence Ferlinghetti the 2019 signature tree planting, an olive tree planted from Mediterranean in North Beach in Washington Square, as Fred was reading from All the Italians Dying, right there at the corner of Union, Washington Square, and right in front of Via Ferlinghetti. If you come, you can see that olive tree there. And it happened. The second thing that I petitioned and I asked was to proclaim Ferlinghetti Day on March 24th, like for Bloomsday, Joyce, everybody reads around the world. And there are many kind of days like for Dylan. So at one point, this thing happened. When Lawrence died, amongst many sympathies that I received, at one point, I read a message, very beautiful one, written by one person of the San Francisco mayor's office, was, sharing her condolences with me and a little story about her family bringing her to City Lights every time they were coming in town. So it came to me so spontaneous that, speaking of dreaming, like in the beautiful poem that Daniela read, I wrote directly to this person and all the office saying, why don't we light City Hall, playing with words, City Hall lights, tributing Lawrence Ferlinghetti in the colors of the Italian flag. Because I want to underline how people like his father, Carlo Ferlinghetti, when they moved to New York City from Brescia, at that time, Italians were the lowest thing in the social ladder. They were the garlic and pepperoni. They were the Dago, the Guido. They were those ones who, even on March 14, 130 years ago in New Orleans, 11 Sicilian Americans were murdered by vigilantes just for bias. And just a few years ago, the mayor recognized that horrible recorded mass lynching. And when I said this thing to the city's office, they replied to me right away and said, "We will make this happen." And I was shocked because I said, is it real? Is it happening for real? Like everybody will look up to the skies of San Francisco and symbolically can read in the sky written fluxare, fulfill your own dreams. And that night, March 26th, when they made it happen, I was double shocked because I was there doing a performance as in the Fluxus movement art that Lawrence was part of in Italy. And there was a big gathering of people from Myanmar rioting, protesting against the violence there. And they were using little candlelight, and the word that came out was Spring Revolution. And I said, this couldn't be better than right now. For Lawrence, this is the legacy. The legacy cannot kill us. The legacy should bring us forward. Lawrence was always looking forward. If you were saying to Lawrence, oh, your bookstore smells of the past, he hated that. He said, oh, please don't tell me that. The bookstore needs to smell the future, the upcoming. Don't forget that Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Peter de Martin, they disrupted the way books were printed back in the 50s, the ways books were produced and distributed back in the 50s with the paper books, you know that, with the distribution that was more democratized. And at the same time, this was a way to attract talents from all over the world. The beat. It's true, Daniela, he wasn't a beat as a beat, but he was a beat as beatitude, because he was a poet of beatitude. And he overpassed the 100 springs of beatitude. So thank you so much for having me today and to contribute to this beautiful Convivium Symposium. We just miss food and wine because Lawrence had a recipe. Remember, the recipe Lawrence shared was in Italian, by the way, and it sounded like this. Mangia bene, ridi spesso, ama molto. This is the recipe. And from 2015, Lawrence, beyond choosing me for working, became more than that, became a friend, my best friend as a companion. I know he was, people says to me, he was old, he was okay, it was time. But for me, it was like I met my companion at the elementary school, because he was like that. And it's true. I'm very young. I'm just 45, 46 for him is nothing. But at the same time, I spend probably more time with him than anybody else, because at least 2 hours a day from 2015, like every day until his last wheeze on that very day, February 22nd, which I'm going to write very soon, because that was the day when, as Efeso says, il Dio il cui oracolo è in Delfi non dice e non nasconde, rivela. The God whose oracle is in Delphi doesn't say, doesn't hide, conceals. Semeion. This is the real core of poetry. You do not have to say, but you do not have to hide. You have to do this kind of signals, you know, from there. And every Christmas time, Lawrence wanted to be in our little apartment in North Beach per mangiare bene, ridere tanto e amare moltissimo.
Mille grazie, Mauro. Mille grazie.
Grazie
I
a voi.
want to say that what Robert Creeley said, Lawrence Ferlinghetti is our determined conscience, our wit and eloquence, our steadfast friend and witness, our communal wisdom's articulate, patiently insistent, old-time voice, would that all might stand as he and be counted. And Amiri Baraka, the great Black American poet, said, a Coney Island of the mind is one of the banners of an emerging generation's quest to remake American poetry. And I want to end, I first want to thank you all, Maria Lisella, Nina Tassi, Dennis Barrone, Michael Palma, Amore, Fred Gardaphe, Mauro, Aprile, Zanetti. And I want to end with this poem 28 from Coney Island of the Mind. Dove sta amore? Where lies love? Dove sta amore? Here lies love. The ringed of love in lyrical delight. Hear love's hill song, love's true will song, love's low plain song in passages of night. Dove sta amore? Here lies love, the ringed of love. Dove sta amore? Here lies love. Rest in peace, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, a great poet of love. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to you.
Thank you all so very much. I would pop back on, but I've lost my camera for some reason. I would just like to let you know that coming up.
Actually, we can see you.
Oh, you can?
Yeah, yeah, you're
Oh,
good.
wonderful. I can't see
You're
myself.
there.
I hope I look okay. Anyway, in April here on the 27th, we're going to have a tribute to Diane DePrima. And so Adele Negro, on behalf of the WRC, with a number of participants, are going to do a nice tribute there. And look forward to May 13th. Fred Gardaphe and Anthony Mitzel. It's going to be an afternoon of Italian American humor. So all of this can be found on our webpage, and there'll be some promo materials going out with links so that you can sign up for the webinars. So thank you so much. This was so beautiful. Like I said before, this will be recorded, or it was recorded, so it'll be linked up, and I will make sure that each of you gets a copy of the link later on this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for all your work with the Italian American Studies Association. And I want to mention the sad passing today of Laura Boss. We all miss her. We are sorry that she's gone. And we know that she's with Lawrence Ferlinghetti, wherever he is. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a lovely evening.
Happy
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.